All right, let's dive in. We're taking a look at this video from Learn English with TV series today.
Sounds interesting.
It is 3 English teachers just chatting about their childhoods, but, well, it gets pretty thought-provoking.
I can imagine. Childhood memories can be such a rich source of,
Yeah.
well, everything. Culture, personal values, all of it.
Exactly. And that's where this deep dive gets interesting. I mean, we start off with this one teacher talking about, get this, making and selling her own books to classmates.
Oh, wow. A little entrepreneur in the making?
Right. And her dad was a high school principal, so paper was like free, unlimited.
Smart, resourceful.
Totally. And she even got creative, like burning the edges of the pages for that, old book look.
Attention to detail. That's impressive. 10 cents a book she was charging, right?
Yeah, 10 cents. It's wild to think about how much that is, or rather, isn't worth these days.
Right. Makes you think about how much the world's changed. For kids, too, probably.
Definitely. So then the conversation takes this turn. She starts talking about buying candy with that book money from this vendor who was always hanging out by the school fence.
Now, that's interesting. Unofficial candy sales right outside the school.
Yeah, totally unsupervised, it sounds like. And this is where the cultural stuff gets really fascinating. Because in a lot of places, that whole stranger danger thing would be a huge deal.
Oh, absolutely. You wouldn't see that in many cultures. But they're talking about it so casually, like it's the most normal thing.
Yeah, like it was just part of life. And it makes you realize how much our ideas about safety, about what's considered risky, are shaped by where we grow up.
Totally. What's normal in one place can be totally out of bounds somewhere else.
And it's not just about stranger danger either, right? It's about trust, community, all those things.
It is. Like in some cultures, maybe there's this assumption that people in the community are going to look out for each other.
Yeah, and in others, it's more about like being cautious, being wary. I mean, that vendor selling random things too, that caught my attention.
Me too. Makes you wonder what random things even means in that context.
Right. But it does hint at this whole informal economy thing, like no matter where you go, people find ways to fill needs to make things work.
Absolutely. Entrepreneurial spirit, right. You see that everywhere, whether it's homemade books or snacks by the school fence.
Totally. Makes you think about how we even define entrepreneurship. Is it always about profit, or is there something else there too, like community, resourcefulness?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
And then things take kind of a dark turn. They start talking about this news story about drug-laced candy. Sour Patch Kids, to be specific.
Yeah, that was chilling. Like, wow, the world can be a lot darker than you realize as a kid.
Definitely. And what's really scary is that they found this candy during a drug bust. So it wasn't just some isolated incident.
Right. It felt like this whole deliberate tactic to, target kids. And the way they described it in the news, using words like bogus and laced to describe the candy.
Yeah, it really emphasized how deceptive it was. Meant to lure kids in, they said.
It's a heavy thought, for sure. Makes you realize the world can be pretty complicated, even scary.
And figuring out how to, talk to kids about that without scaring them too much. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it's a balance.
It is. And that news anchor really emphasizing how parents need to be on the lookout. Like, this could be anywhere.
Right. Even in places you think are safe, you got to be vigilant. It makes you think about how we handle risk in general.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
We're constantly bombarded with warnings.
Yeah.
Right. Of everything from contaminated food to online scams. It's like, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. How do you stay cautious without getting totally paranoid? It's something we all have to figure out, I guess.
And that's where, that whole cultural lens comes in again. Because what might seem like an overreaction to some people
could be perfectly reasonable to others.
Absolutely. It all depends on your experiences, your background.
And when you think about it, this whole conversation started with buying candy from a stranger. In one context, it's this nostalgic memory, but in another,
it's a potential danger, something to be worried about.
It's complicated, that's for sure. Like, how do you balance safety with, trust and community?
It's a big question. And one that doesn't have easy answers, I think. But it's definitely worth thinking about.
It is. And maybe that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground already.
We have. From childhood hustle to the darker side of candy and everything in between.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack here.
Definitely. Looking forward to diving deeper into this in our next part. Yeah, tough stuff. It kind of makes you wonder, how do you even begin to teach kids about these things? Like, without, making them afraid of everything.
Right. It's such a delicate balance. Like, you want them to be aware, but not, terrified to leave the house.
Exactly. And the language they used in that news report. Bogus, laced. It's almost like they're talking about something, well, cool, you know?
It's true. Almost makes it more tempting in a weird way, like forbidden fruit or something.
Yeah, like it's this secret underground thing.
Yeah.
And that makes it even more dangerous, right? Because it's harder to, see the danger.
For sure. And then they were talking about how these treats are designed to, lure kids in. That word lure, it just sends chills down my spine.
It's a strong word for sure. And it really makes you think about all the ways people try to, manipulate others, not just with drugs, but with all sorts of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about all the scams out there, the marketing tricks, all of it.
Right. Like, how do you even know what to trust anymore?
It's tough. And then, that news anchor saying how parents need to be on the lookout, like constantly vigilant, watching for any sign of danger.
It's exhausting, isn't it? Like, you can't relax. You can't let your guard down for a second.
It's true. And it makes me think about that earlier story, buying candy from a stranger. Like, in one context, it's this innocent, nostalgic memory.
And in another, it's like this huge red flag.
Yeah, exactly. It all depends on your perspective, your experiences. Like, what might seem like an overreaction to one person
Could be perfectly reasonable to someone else.
Right. And that's where culture comes in again, right? Like how we're raised, what we're taught to be afraid of.
It shapes everything, doesn't it?
It really does. And it makes this whole conversation about risk and safety even more complicated.
Because there's no easy answer.
Right.
Right. It's not like there's a set of rules you can follow to guarantee your safety.
Exactly. It's about navigating all these different perspectives, trying to find that balance between being cautious and
living your life, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't be afraid of everything.
Totally. But you also can't be naive.
Right. And maybe that's the takeaway here,
Yeah.
It's about critical thinking, being able to assess situations for yourself and make informed decisions.
I like that. Instead of just blindly following rules or giving in to fear, it's about trusting your gut, using your judgment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's how we can equip kids to navigate the world too, not by telling them what to be afraid of, but by teaching them how to think critically, how to make smart choices.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe instead of saying, don't ever take candy from strangers, it's more about teaching them to be aware, to ask questions, to trust their instincts.
Absolutely. Empowerment, not just fear.
I love that. And it circles back to this whole idea of language learning too, doesn't it?
It does. It's not just about the words themselves, but about how we use them to understand the world, to make sense of things.
Totally. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating.
It is. So many layers to unpack here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? We started with these simple childhood memories, and now we're talking about global issues, cultural differences, the whole works.
It's true. It all started with those handmade books and that 10-cent hustle. Who knew it would lead us here?
Right. It just shows how much you can learn from, everyday conversations, even if they're about something as seemingly ordinary as childhood.
Totally. And that's what I love about these deep dives. You never know where they're going to take you.
Exactly. It's all about exploration, about making connections, seeing things from different angles.
It is. And I think that's something we can all take away from this, whether you're learning English or just trying to understand the world around you, it's about being open to new ideas, new perspectives.
Absolutely. And maybe being a little bit more curious about, everything. Why do things work the way they do? What are the different ways of seeing things?
Right. And maybe that curiosity can help us, bridge those cultural gaps, build those connections, make the world a little bit less, scary and a little bit more, understandable.
I like that. And maybe that's a good note to end on. We've covered a lot of ground today, from entrepreneurial kids to drug-laced candy and everything in between.
We have, and I think we've all learned a lot along the way.
Definitely. And hopefully our listeners have too. So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those deep dives going.
And remember, the world is a fascinating place full of surprises, just waiting to be discovered.